of Ash and Flo. This is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around to listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
Welcome to this most recent episode of the Unbillable Hours podcast. Welcome, Ash, and welcome, Luk Smeyers, who's our guest today. Hi, Luk.
Hi.
Very glad to have you on because you are, I think, you came to us just by us finding you, right? So you're clearly doing something right in your own marketing. You're a former CHRO for companies like Starbucks, like Nielsen, I think most recently. And from there, you actually founded a people analytics startup. And then that one got bought by Deloitte, which brought you into the big firm consulting world where I think Ash and I are sort of coasting along.
Yeah, correct.
And you exited there and you started your next venture, which is called the Visible Authority. And that is how we found you, because you are sort of an expert in helping consultants becoming, visible authorities. So we thought we'd inquire about that a little bit. But first, was that fair enough an intro, or did I forget anything?
Yeah, that's correct indeed. So after my CHRO career, that has always been a dream. I started my own consulting company called iNostics, and that came from diagnostics. So it was a people analytics consultancy. I would say pretty much productized, but of course it was professional services. It was a consulting company, but we had a few products that we used to scale it. Yeah. And so what actually happened there was that I was kind of, that was 2007-8, and I was pretty inspired by some of the early famous bloggers like Guy Kawasaki, Seth Godin in his early days. And so what these guys were like, they were on a mission to tell the whole world, you need to share your expertise. So that in a nutshell, that's what they were saying, share. And that's what I started doing. I was very much inspired by that, and from the initial days already of the consulting activity, I started writing case studies and started sharing them, and that was because of the very early days of advanced analytics that was still called big data, and so but it grew actually quite fast, and it as I always say, it kind of got out of control. So we're talking Benelux here, so Belgium, Netherlands were our key markets, and that's where of course we focused on. But in like no time, we got extremely visible for what we were doing in those markets due to today is then called thought leadership, but that word or that description didn't even exist in those days. So I was just sharing case studies, and I did some of the stuff also through print, which was another thing. So I wrote articles I actually wrote the monthly column in an HR magazine in Belgium. I copied that. Those were the early days of reproducing, of repurposing. So I copied that and I sent it to a Dutch magazine, and I had the Dutch column. And so we became extremely known for what we were doing, and so that's how it kind of got out of control. And we got invited everywhere, and so that's a little bit like the ultimate goal of what I'm helping consultants with today, is that of course they get invited for their expertise. So, and that's also why then all of a sudden we had like 4 or 5 large or big firm consultancies knocking on our door. We won several pitches against them, and they couldn't understand why the small guys won those important pitches, because these were like insurance companies and banks, which I think, except for one in both the Netherlands and in Belgium, they were all our clients, so it's amazing in hindsight. And so that's why then all of a sudden, we started talking to Deloitte, because we were in their need for technical platforms, and so they were extremely good in that in those days, and so that's how it all happened. So, and they were looking for the reputational footprint that we had, and so that's how we got together in 2016, and that's kind of the short story.
Yeah. So impressive case study for I think you call it thought leadership. Some might say it's content marketing, whatever it's called. But it's the idea of, as you say, sharing expertise to freely to get market visibility, and that is.
So I wrote about 100 case studies. I was
that is
the
impressive.
case study guy. Yeah, that was
And you said this before. I should say that for Ash, for your benefit and that of the listeners. Luke said in the before we hit the mic on here. You said that writing comes easy to you, Luke, right? Which is that's a superpower in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. I can write a blog, let's say a 1,500 word blog in 30 minutes. But that's also because
I should say because I've read your posts. It's good, right? It's not because lots of people can write 1,500 words in half an hour, but
I'm always trying that is let's say the lens. I'm trying to either inspire people to move the needle, or I'd like to confront or challenge or whatever you call it a little bit, because what I'm of course I have quite a few clients right now, and I'm seeing the same challenges every time or time and time again, and that's of course where then I start writing about that.
That's a bit of a
which is
tangent,
easy
but
in a way.
It's a bit of a tangent. But did it take you any deliberate effort to build that skill? Like, did you decide one day let's work on my copywriting?
I do read a lot about that, and I've done a few courses, but that's already a while ago. So writing comes very natural to me.
But you did make an effort some time back. So that's
absolutely,
absolutely,
and that is also that's in like my list of this would have been a support from marketing that I would have needed in those days, is how you write a good case study. And
interesting.
And so I had to find it out myself all the time, which of course was not very efficient, but it is what it is.
As someone who's led a global content marketing function, I can tell you it's hard to hire people who can write well to this day.
Definitely.
Which is my polite way of saying is probably that not too many people in the marketing functions in the big firms are writers, which is okay. It's not even in their job description, but you know what I mean?
It's not just that, it's also getting that information out. Half of the time, the people who have to put out thought leadership, they have some vague idea, but you have to get someone who can interview them, and then you gotta get someone to write that. These two skills seem to be severely lacking for everyone who wants to just put out a piece of content that actually gives a view.
Still in high demand.
Yeah,
learn that.
Maybe this will get us off track, but I think what I'm seeing the most ideal way of doing it is interviewing and done by a journalist, and the journalist then writes it up. But I've also seen a lot. I've done that myself with a few journalists, and there's only one, after all those years, only one that I have discovered and still working with me, that can translate an interview into a either inspiring or provoking kind of content. Very difficult. I agree.
I think that and that used to piss off people, partners and other people I work with. I always think the first draft needs to come from them, because
it has
you are the expert, and the act of writing it out for me or my team so that we can help you edit it, that forces you to clarify your thinking to a point where it gets good. But I get it.
Definitely. And if you can't, if you don't do that, and then I think that's a very big miss in being a leader in consulting or a consulting expert or whatever you call it. So you can never build a reputational footprint if you don't like writing down your experiences, your learnings, your struggles, whatever.
Yeah, I've seen you write about that. How experts should. I mean, that's a phrase, right? Experts should write, but I think it's
like these past 2 years, I've already written about 200 pages, and those are all 100% experiences in working with other consultants. So it's like after a session, a workshop, I immediately write down 3, 4, 5 pages, like I did in the past. That is then a new case study. And so all these thoughts go into my blogs, go into my posts, and the posts go back into blogs, and they go into my newsletter, and so on and so forth. So it's a machine, but it's very organically built, so to say. It's based on what I'm doing. I don't have to kind of sit down in front of my white paper and get into writer's block. That's impossible.
And I think and I want to get to because you mentioned how you work with clients. I want to get into your model a little bit here, and then we can discuss how marketing could help scale something like that. But what I like here is I can see people sort of shake their heads and say, well, write 5 pages of the workshop. Nobody has got time for that. But I think in your model, the idea is you have the time, because that is actually an investment you make, right, to build your reputational footprint, which then allows you to do more profitable work. So, do you know what I mean? Like, you get out of that. I think that's, am I right in that? That is implied there in your model, that the idea is you make time for these types of things, you build the thought leadership, and then helps you essentially bring in more revenue in less time, which in turn gives you time for writing.
Absolutely. And it's very much what I'm doing with consultants is very much, let's say, case-based. So to build the social proof of their expertise, that's how I always call it. And that shouldn't be too difficult for them. But of course, it takes a while to get into the let's say the routine of writing down your learnings after doing a project, and then writing it down into also readable content for your prospects or for your prospective clients. But the whole idea of nurturing your network, that is something that they just don't have, and that's of course a big next step then. But okay, then maybe we already too far.
Just maybe one step back and just can you summarize on a high level what this? I mean, your firm is called the Visible Authority, and you speak about authority-led business development, I think. So what's that authority-led part there? Can you
so it's let's say in one sentence, it's building and growing a strong reputational footprint as a consultant at scale. So that's the word at scale is important in this, because of course you can do a little bit posting on LinkedIn left and right, but that's in the context of doing it at scale totally inefficient. So I call those people the inefficient enthusiasts.
So that's good stuff already there. I'm taking notes.
So I have a 4x4 square, of course, like all consultants have, and so the upper left corner is the very active consultant, but it's totally inefficient because it's not business development support. It's like a lot of activity, liking, sharing, other stuff, other people's stuff, but it's not really connected, linked with Yeah, indeed. Happy birthday, or this was the weekend in the forest from last week, and so on and so forth. But it's not like creating a reputational footprint based on the expertise of the consultant or of the practice, because that, of course, I always work with the individuals, but when I do this in a consulting firm context, it's of course important that the firm and the activity and the practice is involved in this, because they can't do that on their own. I think you talked about that in your previous podcast, how to organize everything. But okay, so again, going back, building and growing a reputational footprint as a consultant at scale, and the let's say the dream or the mission is to become top of mind with your prospects in your market because of the visible expertise and the credibility, and that's what we are striving for.
So I like to call this out because we've mentioned that, I think, elsewhere before, and I really love this philosophy. What you seem to be saying is people should start thinking about this type of business development. Always the way you describe it, what I'm hearing is it's almost like just putting an editorial process on top of your consulting work, right? Because what I don't hear you say is, I don't know, do a trend research and a fancy survey. But what you're saying is, if you step off a client engagement or if you come out at a workshop, just write up some things which you thought were interesting. So literally sort of report on your own expertise as you build it in the day-to-day. That's at the core of this. Is that fair to say?
Definitely, but of course it's also linked to the let's say the service offering.
Yeah, sure.
And of course, if you're doing projects, then of course that's in the context of the service offering.
Yeah.
But what I'm always doing with them is like stepping back first and thinking about what is the positioning of the practice. So what's the target audience? What's the target problem that you're trying to solve? What's the target service offering linked to that, or the value proposition? So we do a few step backs to make sure that we have an ideal definition of the expertise space that they are in. And then, of course, when that's well defined, you can easily translate that. Then that's really helpful if you have defined audience problem, audience solution, and so on and so forth. That is let's say that's the context for the writing. That's how you connect your thought leadership, if you're using that word, so otherwise what I'm seeing is that a lot of these consultants, they kind of do stuff in an empty space. It's not really linked to their service offering and to the positioning of their practice, and so that's a correction that has to be made in most cases. And as I said before, that's also where I had expected marketing to support me, because doing that positioning work and value proposition design and maybe the design thinking methodology behind it. And so those would be, I would say, techniques that marketing could teach the practice and the leader in a practice. And then that would be extremely helpful, let's say, to make faster progress.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I had that as a question for you. Like, your model is, so you're working directly with the consultants, so you sort of building this authority for the authority-led approach. I think in your world is the responsibility that's firmly on the shoulders of the consulting leader, right? Which is, I think that's definitely where it belongs. But now you mentioned marketing could help. Like, it's funny because I've been in I've seen this all the time happening in firms where there's business and marketing sit across the table, and both of them expects the other side to drive the strategy around something like segmentation or positioning, right? Marketing sits there and thinks, oh, the business will tell me. Do you know what I mean? Like, they will tell me what the ideal client is. They should know. And sometimes some consultants, like you just did, say, well, I was hoping marketing could help me figure it out a little bit, right? And then also there's often obviously the case, and you've written about this, that everybody in the room just has flat out FOMO and is too afraid fear of missing out on revenues, and is afraid to make the decision to nail it down or to narrow it in, right? Because, oh my God, we could lose revenue if we focused on a specific audience. Yeah,
definitely. And that's true. So marketing sits there, if at all they're sitting there, but let's imagine they're sitting there, then that doesn't really work. Because today, if you look at the marketing function in most consultancy firms, that is not the typical role that they are having. So they are struggling to sit there, and they don't really understand what to do. And that's, of course, and you're right, and I put like all the responsibility on the shoulders of the practice leader, which I have been myself, and that's where kind of it comes from. because I think the practice leader has to own this. So the reputational footprint is owned by the practice leader, is not owned by marketing, because especially in larger firms like in Deloitte, Belgium is a very small country. They had 120 or even more practices. So marketing can't do the work. It has to be, let's say, anchored in the practice. But marketing is the guide, so gives guidance and gives support, system support to create a machine within the practice. And so that's today how I'm trying to help the consultant.
Which that is very interesting for me to hear, because I think somehow that's the idea. Like a lot of the marketing teams I see are somewhat structured in that way. But then this question you just had previously, like, could you give us guidance on copywriting? Could you help us both value proposition design? That's often not in the scope of the capabilities of the marketing team. Like, they build as a support function and they can do graphic design work, or they can help with sourcing and organizing events. But there's not a team in there that specializes in helping with value proposition design. Or not often. I mean, it exists, right? And especially the bigger firms probably have that. But that is an interesting
and Flo, what you hear out from all of this is essentially both marketing and sales, the business, they have their own funnels, and they're both asking the other to find where the midpoint is so that the funnels can connect, essentially. And not just in terms of the actual the leads, but also in terms of skills. Yeah. And that's the general problem that, when we speak to everyone, we come across, really.
Yeah, that's true. So is there a recommendation, Luk? Are you saying the marketing colleagues in the firms should build their own authority and offer a few set of new in-house services, right? Maybe then get us to join the big guys on the table as strategy gets discussed.
Yeah, definitely. I think that marketing has to move into this more, let's say, conversational kind of case-driven way of working with the practices, and provide support there as we have already discussed. And of course, the practice and the practice team also has to create new routines in the way that they become more visible and reputed for the expertise that they are having in the team. So it's a new direction for both of them, and that makes it, of course, quite challenging. But I think that I'm working with a few consultancy firms and within a few practices, and they're really motivated and enthusiastic also to get their expertise more visible in the market and build that reputational footprint and grow the reputational footprint. And if you look at the way that business development works today, is that the buyers on the other side, they do their homework, and as I always say, you have to get included in the homework. That's a metaphor I'm always using. So the buyer, depending on the research that you're reading, it's like 70, 80, sometimes 90% of the decision making happens during the research of the buyer before they get in touch with a consultant or a consultancy. So that's why I'm always saying you have to get included in the buyer's homework. And how can you get included in the buyer's homework? Well, that's because that's through your, as I always say, then your cases, your social proof, the expertise that you are showing to the world. And where, of course, you then connect with the buyer or with the user or whatever, the role of the future client. So, and they are very enthusiastic, but they're also extremely struggling with how to do that. And of course, and I have a whole list of challenges of the big firm. The classical structure of the practice isn't really helpful, because to name your podcast, the unbillable, these are very often unbillable hours, and that needs to be discussion. So when I joined Deloitte, I immediately made sure that I had 30% of my time unbillable to do this work for our practice. And step by step, I also got into more people in the team with 5, 10, 15 to even 20% of their time freeing up for doing this kind of work. But it was part of my, let's say, governance activities that I tried to get more unbillable hours to do the business development of the team. And business development was, of course, improving the reputational footprint.
Yeah. And that's maybe one to call out for maybe other practice leaders listening. That's 30% of the time going into building the reputation, right? Not just 30% of time unbillable, and then a lot of that is spent on coaching people, team development. So that
was 100% business development. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So all the other quote unquote non-billable practice building activities came on top of that. So take a note of that, people.
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah. But yeah, if your reputation is good and you get invited that's what happened to us. So all those years we got invited. I never had to sell. I never had to go out and find new clients. So we always got invited because people wanted to talk, wanted to learn. When we sat there, they had our case studies printed out in front of them in a binder. So that was really an easy way of doing. But that also led to, of course, when you get invited and people are almost like extremely enthusiastic or motivated to work with you, then of course you are in a different ball game with different pricing, and that pricing of course has to compensate for the time that you invest in building the reputation.
Yeah,
it's as easy as that, but yeah, it's also as difficult as that.
It's as difficult in the existing, like you said, incentive structures and how the organizations are built, right? Yeah,
definitely, yeah. But I'm seeing more and more consultancies and consultancy firms and practices, as I always say, starting to combine the power of the brand with the power of the expert or the reputation of the expert. And if you can combine that, the partner who acquired us, who signed the contract with us in those days in Deloitte, he always said, I want the combination of the first name with the last name, and the last name, he said, was the brand name. So in this case, that was Deloitte, and the first name was us, and was myself, was Luk, who was very known in the market. So first name, last name combination. He said that's the ideal way of doing business development and consulting.
Nice.
How common is that line of thinking these days? I mean, it was not that much when, you had the conversation clearly, but are you seeing people move in that direction now?
Yes, more and more. Well, at least they are knocking on the door. I have a call later today with a spin-off of a large consultancy firm, and they are spinning off an expertise domain. So they're creating a new company, new name, and so they have appointed a new guy. So, and the guy wants to talk to me about from the very beginning, making all the right steps to create a reputation. Which for me, at one hand, is fantastic because you can do all the necessary things from scratch, and so in the ideal way, so to say. But at the other hand, it's also a little bit of a challenge because there is nothing yet. There is like a little bit of hypothetical thinking about who is your audience there and what's their pain. But anyway, so yeah. So they, of course, they know me from the past, from I don't know where exactly, but they know me, and they knocked on the door and they said, we'd like to do it in the right way because we'd like to become the number one reputation brand for that particular stuff. And so what they are trying to do is build a narrative where everything like fits into their strategy. That's in
excellent
fact
stuff.
What they're trying to do.
That actually warms my heart because, as you might know, my own firm I built on the hypothesis that the market is going to swing in that direction, and that sort of strategic marketing finally arrives in the consulting industry. I admit freely, sometimes there are days when I doubt that was the hypothesis is sound, because there's still firms who are very much sales driven, and sort of marketing gets sprinkled on top of stuff. But I would agree with the notion that it's more and more it swings into the direction you just described.
Yeah,
So.
Absolutely. I think there is a trend because there is definitely an overall or an overarching trend that like personal branding. I don't want to call it that way because I think it's too narrow. But at the end of the day, even consulting is a P2P business, so people buy from people, and of course, if the person is known and has a reputation for his or her expertise and is very visible in the market, like top of mind when it comes to solving that particular problem, then of course you have a tremendous advantage. I have seen pitches in the past, 10 million pitches for, let's say, SAP implementations, where of course you only have a few one with 10 million kind of projects. So 2 big consultancy firms, and the one that was chosen was the guy who was visible, very visible in the market, and the other leader who was also pitching for the same 10 million. And the pricing of both was, I think, 10K different from each other. So it was like same price, but one guy was very well known in the market, and the other one was totally invisible. And so they chose for the visible guy because they were able to find all kinds of stuff from this, as I always call it, the trust stuff. So case studies, presentations, whatever. And that guy was chosen. So it has a tremendous advantage, in the buying phase.
Yeah. And I think, and I'm looking at the clock, so to try to wrap us up and guide us out. But I think it's very good takeaway here that there is let's phrase it like that. There's a competitive advantage in this, right? In becoming a visible authority as you have it in your firm name. And I really like the ideas we've raised here for how the marketing teams in the firms might be well advised to think about supporting that type of approach much better. I almost feel like structurally it is there. Certainly when I worked in consulting places, and Luke, you don't know this, or maybe you don't know, but I started I had a job at Deloitte in business development, first job out of college.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. In Germany. But so when structurally it's always been there, right? Often a practice as a marketing team, they work directly with marketing, with a practice leader and so forth. But your points about you as the practice did not necessarily get the service offerings from the marketing teams, which you would have liked. I think that's something to think about. So excellent stuff. I could go on for like an hour more to listen to your thoughts, but we don't have that time. So can I ask where can people find you online and find more from you if they are interested in hearing more about the model?
I think the easiest one, of course, is my website. That's thevisibleauthority.com. But I'm on LinkedIn also, and you're probably mentioning that in your show notes.
Yes, we will.
Yes, we will.
Yeah. So LinkedIn is my frontline machine.
As it is for so many people these days. That was great, Luke. Much appreciated.
Thanks for joining us.
The time. Yeah,
you're welcome. Very welcome.
And I think I'm gonna stop the recording here.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.